Have you ever felt like you're just the replacement version in your own life? Like every attempt to learn English is always behind someone smarter, faster, more confident than you? Today's video is my journey in Denmark, where I was not only a second wife, but also someone trying to escape the shadow of a first love. And strangely enough, practicing slow, clear English listening, reading, speaking became the one thing that saved me from giving up. Shadow of first love. It's strange how your brain can turn into a theater projector at the worst possible moments. You might be standing in a quiet Danish kitchen, making morning coffee, and suddenly every insecurity you've ever tried to bury starts playing like a rerun you never asked to watch. That was me. Living in a small town outside Aarhus, realizing I wasn't just learning how to survive a new language. I was learning how to survive the ghost of someone who came before me. People think jealousy is loud, messy, dramatic. But the truth? The real kind is quiet. It hides in the spaces between conversations, in the silence at dinner, in the way you notice his eyes soften at a song he once shared with someone else. Even if he never says her name, your brain says it for him. And the worst part is when you start comparing your English, your accent, your pauses, your mistakes to an imaginary version of her who probably spoke better, faster, cleaner. Science says our brains are wired to detect threats, real or imagined, because it helps us survive. But honestly, sometimes it feels like your nervous system is just being dramatic for no reason. It whispers things like, "See? You're not enough," or "He loved her more." Or the classic hit single, "Your English will never sound natural here." If the brain had a playlist, it would be 90% self-doubt remixes. Living in Denmark amplified everything. The silence here is so thick it makes your thoughts louder. Danes are kind, but their calmness can make you feel like you're living inside a library where every mistake echoes. And when you're already battling the invisible shadow of the first love, every mispronounced word feels like proof that you're falling short. Again. But here's the twist. Shadows only exist when there's light. And sometimes when you're tired of comparing yourself, tired of feeling second, tired of fighting ghosts, that's when you finally see the light that was behind you the whole time. Learning English slowly, intentionally, became my way of turning around. Every new word was like reclaiming a tiny corner of myself. Every clear sentence was proof that I wasn't disappearing. I was growing. The shadow didn't vanish overnight. It rarely does. But the moment you realize you're not here to replace anyone, you're here to exist, fully, loudly, and perfectly, everything shifts. And maybe the most surprising lesson is this. The shadow was never the enemy. The real battle was convincing yourself that you deserve your own space in the story. And you do. You absolutely do. Life as a second wife. There's something strangely cinematic about becoming a second wife in a country that feels like a snow globe, quiet, beautiful, but always a little too cold. You don't plan it. You don't wake up one day and say, "Yes, I'd love to walk into a love story that already had a season 1. But life in Denmark has a way of throwing you into roles you never auditioned for. And suddenly, you're standing in a minimalist living room surrounded by Scandinavian furniture, wondering how someone like you ended up in chapter 2 of a book you didn't write. People assume being a second wife is all about drama, jealousy, and whispered comparisons. But the reality is far subtler and far heavier. It's the tiny pauses he makes when someone mentions the past. The old photos tucked away in a drawer he thinks you don't know about. The way strangers politely ask, "So how long have you been together?" with that microsecond of calculation behind their eyes. Denmark is a small country. People notice things, and here's the scientifically inconvenient truth. The brain despises uncertainty. When it doesn't have answers, it makes them up. It fills the silence with fiction, and suddenly everything becomes a clue. A sigh becomes a memory of her. A song becomes a ghost. A quiet dinner becomes a silent comparison you never agreed to participate in. Psychologists call it cognitive filling. I call it your brain being dramatic again. You try to blend into Danish life, follow the calm rhythm, but you feel like a loud color in a neutral painting. Everyone here cycles through life with ease while you're still struggling to pronounce Rodgrad med flowed without choking on your dignity. You want to be enough. You want to be the new chapter he chose, not just the chapter he settled for. And when your English isn't perfect, when you pause too long searching for a word, you feel like your imperfection is another reason you don't measure up. But here's the plot twist. Imperfection is where your real story begins. Being a second wife taught me something Denmark never explicitly says out loud. Every relationship here is built on honesty, not hierarchy. And honesty forced me to face a truth I had avoided. No one expects you to erase the past. They expect you to build the present. The day I realized that, something softened. I stopped trying to be a better version of someone else and started being a louder, clearer version of me. Yes, the shadow of the first love still lingered, but it no longer controlled the lighting. And maybe, just maybe, being the second wife didn't make me second choice. It made me the one who arrived when both of us finally knew what real love cost. And honestly, that's a role I'm proud to play. English as my lifeline. There's a moment in every expat's life when language stops being vocabulary and suddenly becomes oxygen. For me, that moment happened on a Tuesday morning in Denmark. Gray sky, cold kitchen, and a silence so thick it felt like a third person in the room. You don't really notice how fragile your confidence is until the only bridge you have to another human being is a language you're terrified of misusing. That's when English stopped being a school subject and quietly became my lifeline. Imagine standing in a place where every conversation feels like walking on ice. One wrong word, one wrong tone, one awkward pause, and your brain convinces you the entire world just judged you. That's not drama, that's neuroscience. The amygdala fires up like a malfunctioning smoke detector whenever it senses social danger, and nothing triggers it faster than speaking a language you don't fully control. In those moments, your heartbeat becomes a metronome of panic, and your tongue feels like it's made of wood. I remember sitting at a family dinner, everyone speaking Danish effortlessly, passing dishes, laughing softly. And there I was, smiling, nodding, surviving. English was the only tool I had to express my real self, the version of me who wasn't silent, awkward, or lost in translation. But even then, my English wasn't the polished kind you hear in movies. It was the kind filled with pauses, rewinds, and the occasional moment where my brain decided to take a lunch break mid-sentence. Still, it was mine, and it was the only path out of the loneliness. There's a psychological principle called cognitive anchoring. Your brain clings to anything familiar to stay afloat. English became that anchor. When emotions were too heavy, when Denmark felt too quiet, when being a second wife felt too complicated, English was the one place where I could breathe in full sentences. I practiced in cafes, on the bus, in the shower. Sometimes I whispered words just to remind myself I still existed beyond the silence. Learning English slowly, intentionally, gently was not just a study method. It was therapy disguised as language practice. Every new phrase felt like stitching myself back together. Every correctly pronounced sentence felt like reclaiming one more piece of my identity. It wasn't about being perfect, it was about being present. People underestimate how language can shape your sense of self. When you lose the ability to express your thoughts clearly, you start to believe those thoughts matter less. And when you finally speak, and someone understands you, you feel the quiet miracle of belonging in Denmark, surrounded by a past that wasn't mine and a silence that wasn't chosen. English became the bridge I built with my own hands. Slowly, clumsily, but beautifully. And maybe the most surprising part? The more I learned to speak, the more I learned to stay. The Danish winter wall. If you've never lived through a Danish winter, let me paint the picture for you. Imagine waking up inside a refrigerator that learned how to feel emotions. The sky is a permanent shade of gray called almost morning but not really. The sun clocks out at 3:30 p.m. like it's fed up with life. And your motivation? It melts faster than snowflakes on your laptop keyboard. Denmark in winter doesn't just test your patience. It tests your language skills, your mental stamina, and your will to exist. There's a reason scientists say lack of sunlight messes with your serotonin. Your brain runs low on happy fuel. So even making a cup of tea feels like you're climbing a psychological Mount Everest. Now imagine trying to practice English listening exercises while your body is literally negotiating with you like, hey, what if we just hibernate until April? Your nervous system becomes a grumpy roommate who refuses to cooperate. And your brain? It responds to darkness by replaying every insecurity you've ever had, as if winter is the perfect season for self-sabotage. For me, the Danish winter didn't just dim the light outside, it dimmed the light inside. I'd sit by the window, wrapped in 3 layers of sweaters, listening to English dialogues about cheerful people ordering coffee in sunny cafes. Meanwhile, I hadn't seen the sun in 9 days, and the only sound outside was the wind slapping the windows like it was personally offended by my existence. And here's the weird part. The quieter the world gets, the louder your thoughts become. Winter turned my mind into an echo chamber where every fear I tried to outrun came back wearing a snow jacket. Thoughts like, you'll never speak English naturally, or you'll always be second best, or the crowd favorite. Why are you even trying? The season was cold, but my self-doubt was colder. But there's something incredibly Danish about surviving winter. You don't fight it, you adapt to it. There's a term here, hygge. People translate it as coziness, but it's really about creating warmth where none exists. So I started making my English practice soft, gentle, human. Slow podcasts, simple novels, YouTube videos with warm lights and calm voices. Instead of forcing myself to perform, I let myself listen. Instead of racing through vocabulary lists, I learned how to enjoy one sentence at a time. Psychologists call this cognitive reframing. I call it teaching my brain to chill out. The more I slowed down, the more the winter stopped feeling like a punishment. Learning English in this slow, intentional way suddenly made sense. It wasn't weakness. It was alignment. The outside world was quiet, so my learning became quiet too. And here's the unexpected twist. When you learn to speak gently during the darkest season, your voice becomes stronger than the cold. Winter didn't break my English. It shaped it. It made every word feel earned, every sentence feel like a small victory against the dark. And in a strange, poetic way, that's how I learned to survive both the winter and myself. Rebuilding my voice. There's a funny thing about losing your voice. It doesn't happen all at once. It slips away quietly, the way socks disappear in a laundry machine. One day you're speaking boldly, loudly, freely, and the next you're whispering to yourself in a foreign country, terrified of mispronouncing a four-letter word. That was me, standing in a Danish supermarket staring at a cashier, knowing exactly what I wanted to say in English, yet feeling like my voice had been hijacked by a shy version of me I didn't recognize. Psychologists say that when you feel socially unsafe, your brain activates the freeze response. Fight, flight, freeze. I didn't fight. I didn't run. I froze, especially when speaking. My mouth would open, but my confidence would glitch. My English wasn't broken, my self-trust was. And somehow rebuilding my voice became the most unexpected part of my life in Denmark. It started with something embarrassingly simple. Reading children's books out loud. Yes, children's books. Picture me, an adult, sitting on the couch in a candle-lit hygge corner, sounding out slow, clear English sentences designed for 7-year-olds. And yet, something magical happened. When you speak slowly without pressure, your brain stops judging you. It starts cooperating. It gives you space to breathe between every word. I took long walks around my Danish neighborhood. Brick houses, quiet streets, bicycles everywhere, and practiced English under my breath like I was narrating my own documentary. Here I am walking past the bakery, trying not to slip on the ice, because that would be embarrassing on multiple levels. It sounds silly, but narrating my life helped me reclaim ownership of it. When you speak your reality out loud, it becomes yours again. Science calls this self-directed speech. I call it pep-talking myself into existence. Then came listening practice, the slow kind. No more fast-talking podcasts that made me feel stupid. I switched to gentle, clear voices. I shadowed them. I repeated after them. At first, I sounded like a broken robot learning empathy. But over time, the rhythm settled into my bones. I wasn't imitating anymore, I was integrating. The biggest breakthrough came during a dinner with Danish friends. Someone asked me a question in English. Normally, I'd rush, panic, stumble. But that night, I spoke slowly. Not because I lacked vocabulary, but because that was the pace where my voice felt safe. And something amazing happened. They listened. They leaned in. They didn't judge the pauses. They respected them. That's when I realized, your voice isn't rebuilt through perfect grammar. It's rebuilt through moments where you choose to speak even when it feels easier to stay silent. The more I practiced slow English, the more I felt my identity stitching itself back together. I wasn't hiding behind hesitations anymore. I was using them, shaping them, turning them into rhythm, into intention, into clarity. Rebuilding my voice in Denmark wasn't about learning to sound native. It was about learning to sound like myself again. And honestly, that's the kind of fluency no textbook can teach. The turning point. There's a moment, usually unexpected, usually inconvenient, when your entire life quietly flips itself inside out. Mine happened on a windy afternoon in Denmark, the kind where the sky looks like it accidentally selected the monochrome filter. I was sitting on a bench near the harbor in Aarhus, wrapped in a scarf big enough to qualify as emotional support furniture, When a simple realization hit me so hard it felt like someone unplugged the anxiety inside my brain. Up until that day, I had treated the first love like a ghost haunting the house I lived in. She was everywhere and nowhere at the same time, a silent competitor in a race I never signed up for. Every mistake I made, every awkward sentence, every Danish word I butchered, every misunderstanding, I blamed on not being her. It sounds dramatic, but that's what the human brain does when it doesn't feel safe. Neuroscience calls it negative attribution bias. I call it your brain acting like a jealous roommate. But that afternoon, something strange happened. I saw an older Danish couple sitting by the water. No drama, no tension. Just two people sharing silence like it was a luxury good. And it hit me, nobody is checking a scoreboard. Nobody is keeping track of who was first or second. Nobody is comparing chapters the way I was. The only person keeping the ghost alive was me. It was ridiculous. It was liberating. It was the plot twist I didn't know I needed. I realized I had been living in reaction mode. Every emotion, every insecurity, even my English practice was centered around proving something to someone who wasn't even in the picture anymore. My learning wasn't about joy, it was about survival. And you can't grow when you're constantly defending your place in a story that isn't yours. So I made a tiny, almost laughable decision. I would learn English for me. Not to sound smarter. Not to sound more native. Not to fill someone else's shoes. Just for the pure pleasure of it. Because English made me feel alive, connected, expressive, like someone who still had a voice worth hearing. Once that mental shift happened, everything else softened. I stopped forcing myself to memorize vocabulary lists like I was preparing for war. I started enjoying slow English videos, reading novels that felt warm instead of intimidating, speaking at a pace that felt like breathing instead of sprinting. And suddenly my progress exploded. Not because I tried harder, but because I finally stopped fighting myself. There's a scientific explanation for this, of course. When your brain is in threat mode, language centers shut down. When it feels safe, open, curious, learning becomes effortless. Or as I like to say, your brain learns better when it's not busy freaking out. The turning point wasn't about the first wife or English or Denmark. It was about realizing that healing begins the moment you stop chasing ghosts and start choosing yourself. And that's when I finally understood. You don't escape the shadow by running from it. You escape it by turning around and facing the light that was behind you the whole time. Speaking into the light. There's a moment in every language learner's life when you stop sounding like you're practicing English and start sounding like you're speaking your truth. It happens quietly, like the way spring sneaks into Denmark. One soft breeze, one patch of sunlight, one day when the sky finally remembers how to be blue. For me, that moment came during a conversation I didn't expect to survive, much less succeed in. I was at a small birthday gathering, warm lights, soft music, the usual Danish minimalism that somehow makes everything feel calm but intimidating at the same time. Someone asked me gently, "How has it been for you living here, being in this new chapter of his life?" Normally, this kind of question would have triggered a full system shutdown in my brain. You know the drill. Amygdala panic, vocabulary leakage, mouth dry like Sahara moment. But something was different. I took a breath. Not the panicked kind, but the grounded kind, the kind that whispers, "You get to choose your pace." And I spoke. Slowly. Clearly. Honestly. "My life here," I said, has been a lesson in learning to be enough, learning to speak even when my voice shakes, learning to be myself, not somebody else's shadow. The room didn't judge me. No one rushed me. No one looked confused by my slow English. They listened, really listened. And for the first time I realized that speaking slowly isn't a flaw. It's an invitation, a doorway, a gentle reminder that communication isn't about speed. It's about presence. Psychologists call this authentic self-expression. When your nervous system finally realizes the world isn't going to attack you for being real. I call it the moment my voice finally unpacked its suitcase and decided to live here. After that night, something in me unlocked and I spoke more. At cafes, in stores, with neighbors. Not perfectly, not quickly, but fully. I stopped worrying that every sentence made me look less than her. That first love ghost who used to live rent-free in my mind. I stopped comparing accents like they were battle scores. I stopped editing myself mid-sentence. The truth is, when you stop trying to sound like someone else, your real voice walks out of the shadows like, finally, my turn. And here's the scientific cherry on top. When you speak slowly, your brain processes language more efficiently. It builds stronger neural pathways, deeper memory, clearer connections. In other words, speaking slowly isn't evidence of weakness. It's proof of mastery. Or as I like to put it, slow is smooth. Smooth becomes fluent. Standing there in that warm Danish room, with my voice steady and my truth finally audible, I felt something shift inside me. I wasn't the second wife. I wasn't the outsider. I wasn't the insecure learner. That I was just me, speaking into the light. A new kind of love. By the time spring returned to Denmark, I realized something profound. Love and life doesn't always arrive as fireworks or grand declarations. Sometimes it arrives quietly, in the shape of patience, self-respect, and words carefully chosen in a language that once felt impossible. My journey as a second wife, as an English learner, as a person living in someone else's shadow, had brought me to a new understanding of both love and myself, that I learned that the first love doesn't have to be an enemy. Its shadow doesn't have to define your present. In fact, the first can exist in your memory like a gentle reminder that life moves forward, that every relationship teaches you how to value your own voice. And in that clarity, I discovered a love stronger than comparison, a love that starts with oneself. Loving myself enough to speak, to pause, to stumble, and to be understood became the foundation for every other connection in my life. English, which had once been a survival tool, became a bridge. It connected me to neighbors, friends, and strangers. It gave me confidence to express my thoughts and feelings. Every word I practiced, every sentence I repeated, every slow, deliberate conversation was a small act of self-love. It reminded me that growth doesn't need to be loud. It only needs to be consistent. And in that consistency, I found my place, my voice, and my calm. That I remember sitting one evening, looking at the harbor, reflecting on how far I had come. The fear of comparison, the anxiety of being second, the heavy shadows, they all felt lighter now. They hadn't disappeared, but they no longer dictated my life. Instead, they had shaped me into someone resilient, patient, and intentional. Someone who could love, communicate, and live fully in her own light. And here's the lesson I want you to take away. You don't escape the past by outrunning it. You embrace the present by speaking your truth, learning your language, and honoring your own growth. Slow, clear English is more than a skill. It's a declaration. I exist. I am heard. I am enough. So, if you're struggling right now, feeling invisible, or doubting your place, remember this story. Remember that every slow sentence, every carefully chosen word, every attempt to be understood, is a small but powerful act of courage. You are building your voice, your identity, and your freedom one word at a time.